being able to be agile and adapt to situations, listen to your constituents and to your team members are hugely important things.
Today we have an incredible guest, Judy Baker, who spent 30 years as a lead economist with the World Bank. Judy has worked on some of the world's most pressing issues, including poverty reduction, affordable housing, and sustainable city development. She has been a driving force behind transformative projects across the globe, and today she's here to share her insights on the future of urbanization in developing countries. From her impactful work in Indonesia to her ongoing efforts as an independent advisor, Judy will explain the key challenges facing low-income communities and what it takes to create lasting change. You won't want to miss her unique perspective on how to tackle these global challenges head-on. Before we dive in, don't forget to tell your friends about the visionaries and help us spread the word. I can't think of anyone better to speak about bringing a visionary project to life than the brilliant Judy Baker. Welcome, Judy.
Thank you, Nikki. Super glad to be here.
So, Judy, what is the bold project that we're discussing today and how is it different?
So what I wanted to talk to you today about was some work that I did in Indonesia around what we call slum upgrading. And I will say that it's linked to many other projects that do the same kind of thing. So some of the experiences draw very much on that. What the sort of background of this project is that we know that lots of people move to cities. They move because cities give lots of opportunities for jobs, for better services, for better living conditions. So over time, people urbanize, and we know that no country has reached middle income status without urbanizing. So Indonesia was selected because indeed it's been doing this kind of work for a long time. It started probably in the early 70s. Where we started with urban upgrading, what we call urban or slum upgrading projects. And these are aimed to address the challenges of people living in slums. So those challenges include poor access to basic services like water and sanitation, limited opportunities for roads and mobility to get in and out of where they are. Living in conditions that are near, first of all, overcrowded and also very near environmental hazards like dump sites or on steep hillsides or low-lying plains that get flooded all the time. And of course, climate change has had additional impact on these conditions. So the project is called Slum Upgrading, and with that, we go in, and I will say that this represents work that I did with many teams from the World Bank. We go in with a package of basic infrastructure services to address these challenges. We listen to communities. We design interventions to meet the needs on the ground, and with that, we can improve living conditions.
And this is phenomenal. And, I've been fortunate to travel and be in places like, India and South Africa and developing countries. And, these informal communities pop up because people don't have another option. And I suppose, can you maybe give a sense of how many people are living in some of these slums? How big is the issue? How do you go about going into a community where people are there out of necessity and they're already living there and you're saying, well, now we're going to put in infrastructure underneath you? Like, how do you even start grappling with a consideration that's that big and it's already established? You're not coming in terra nullius with nobody living there, that you're coming in with a blank slate. Like, how do you even start to conceptualize it?
So you're right. It's a huge problem. So we know that something like over 1 billion people are living in slums around the world. It's an enormous number. And honestly, it hasn't gone down greatly over time because, though in some countries, they've done a lot to address it and people do over time find better living conditions in cities. People keep coming to cities. So as you said, when they get there, they have no place to live. So they end up squatting. And then you end up with these, very, very difficult situations that is much harder to come in after the fact and address. So where do you start? You start with communities. It's a very complex process. You need to listen to people on the ground to find out what their needs are, to find out who they are, why they're there, how do they make a living. You also need to work with local governments. They play a huge role in cities, and they have various factors that influence their decision-making around planning, urban planning, around sustainability, around connectivity, and of course around resource constraints. And then finally, there's national governments, and they have policies and programs to address these issues, but it's always a little bit of a political dance about who gets what and where decisions are made, and it's not always done in a way that reaches those people that are most at need. So that's kind of the big picture about where we start. And I will say it is complex. And I also wanted to add one really important point, and that's around what you can do before. So in countries that are just at the early stages of urbanizing, and it's not so many anymore, but places, for example, in Africa, they're still mostly rural. You have a chance not to make the mistakes that many countries have seen. And that's about going in with just laying down basic infrastructure, the foundations of rights of way, and maybe, water and sanitation and drainage. And the rest will take care of itself. It is much easier to do it beforehand than after.
And you said the magic word, complexity. That's what I'm hearing about. You've got leaders at the local level. You've within the community themselves. You've got leaders at the government level, the formal leadership of a place. At the global level, these different institutions all having a say and an interplay. And I can imagine that in this type of environment, you've really got to manage people's desires versus expectations. And there's probably also an element where people don't necessarily know how to change because this is the way that things have been done and perhaps it's being held together by sticky tape. But where do you even begin? So day one, you as an economist, you're being assigned a slum in Indonesia, and you've got to put together this grand master plan about thinking about not just what is this desired outcome in the future for the economy, but how do you actually manage that process along the way that it's not too disruptive to breaking your community apart. And you're seeing I'd imagine you're probably seeing these milestones along the way. So how do you kind of balance that practicality of this big picture objective with the near term realities and making sure that you're not just pushing people out of the way and they're coming in on this journey? And I suppose part of why I'm asking this is that I've been reading and listening to a lot of stories about Robert Moses in New York and the way that his way of urbanization, his way of progress was basically say, I'm putting a bridge through here. I'm putting a highway through here. I don't care, who I disrupt, who I hurt. He didn't really care. And it had a terrible impact. And, in a city like New York, we're still seeing the ramifications of that bulldozing generations later. And I can imagine that's not the type of thing you want to be doing. So that's a long-winded way to say, how do you balance that, the desire for progress at the same time of not degrading the values and that community spirit?
Indeed, it's complex. So, I mentioned the many, many stakeholders. I didn't even talk about the private sector who have a lot of interests in the land. So there are many complexities and various stakeholders that you need to balance. As an economist, I come at this with a very sort of practical perspective, and a lot of that is rooted in data. So I always want to first come in and do the analysis that needs to be done to understand in a very rigorous way what's happening on the ground. Where are people living? Who owns the land? What does mobility and accessibility look like? What do master plans look like in a given place? Who owns given lands? What are the policies that help to decide who gets to own land? Are they restrictive? Do they lock out low-income populations? So there's so many factors. So when we come in, usually the thing that I am a huge proponent on is doing good, solid, baseline information, data collection. Sometimes it's qualitative, so it's not just, numbers, but also talking to people, various stakeholders, trying to get a good handle on the situation. And then, you can go to have outputs that are addressed to the various needs for various populations. You can go back to them. It's a very important step to go back with the findings and start to build a case on what needs to happen. The good news is that we have now, we meaning sort of the development community, have decades of experience of doing this. And there's quite a bit of evidence on what works and what doesn't through impact evaluations and other kinds of studies. So I think the technical solutions are pretty clear. When it comes to the softer side around politics and specifics related to various societies, that becomes much more complex. And again, it's a lot of consultation and back and forth. It's not an easy process.
So within this, you're talking about these hard factors and these soft factors. And you're talking about being able to share best practice within your organization. And I'd imagine probably with the broader development community. If you were to take a look back at the different projects that you've worked on, and if you call it the learnings that come through all this, codification or standardization or these learnings about how do you do development well, especially in an existing slum community, are there certain moments that you can look at and go, wow, we really could have done it in a different way, in retrospect, or whether there's even a change in the values that happened between perhaps when it was delivered in the 90s versus today? What are some of the changes that you've seen happening?
So indeed, we keep learning. And again, that goes back to the importance of just being able to take the time when projects go forward, and really understand what's happening on the ground. And over time, there's been lots and lots of studies and evidence that show us what works and what doesn't. Indeed, some of the things that we've learned are, about right now, they seem so obvious to us, but, 20 or 30 years ago, people weren't thinking about these things. So, for example, the importance of the role of community and having community voice. I think historically it used to be you just talk to the senior policymakers, the decision makers, and that's going to be good enough. It just doesn't really work, as I think all know, globally, in the US as well. Some of the other things are the use of technology. So there's lots of new ways to do things that didn't exist before. We have ways to collect information using cell phones, or just being able to let a community know about a procurement process that might be happening, and they themselves can be eyes on the ground to make sure that everything is transparent and that the suppliers are using the materials that they say they're supposed to use. And there's lots and lots of little things like that have improved over time. We also know that it's not just the physical investments that are important, but also the social investments. So, again, if you think about basic services, those are, of course, obvious, but things like investing in community centers and health clinics, they can help bring a community together and make it stronger, provide better networks for people to find jobs, better outlets and markets for their goods and services that they might be providing. So those are the softer investments, or the social investments that also have a huge impact, and something that we've learned over time.
So we know that change is hard, and even when the desired outcome is exceptional, it's still difficult to make those changes. And along the way, you ruffle some feathers, you break things. Things aren't a smooth process. And especially for you, when you have so many different stakeholders and when there's real consequences at play, it's not an easy situation. Do you have some standard lines that you tend to use to be able to motivate a team, or to, I don't want to say change the mind of a stakeholder, but to help them see a different perspective? How do you overcome resistance to change? What have you learned along the way that you can share with listeners?
So the biggest thing, of course, it's an obvious one, but that's to listen. When I go into a country, whether it's Indonesia or elsewhere, so I realize that this is not my country. It's not my environment. I don't know all the circumstances that might affect how people feel, how people see things. So it's a huge process to try to understand that. Fortunately, I always work with local teams. I have, it's not just me. It's the local team that's on the ground, and I can bring a lot of the technical experience from around the world, but locally people know how to get things done. So that's the most important thing for me, is to listen. And then it's also about being able to adapt. So I might come in, we know that in, say, Vietnam, they've done it this way, so it should work here. Well, that's not really the case. So we might have to adapt some approaches that have been used, things that have been done in that same country historically, but given changing environment or political situation, things need to be done differently. So being able to be agile and adapt to situations, listen to your constituents and to your team members are hugely important things.
And a lot of what you're describing to me sounds like very good leadership practice. And for you, having spent a few decades in the World Bank, which I'm a millennial, my generation, we jump ship every 18 months. But now you've become a consultant. Can you maybe talk about how you took that step from being in a very structured environment to now being in quite a loose environment? And if you see this as being the future of how projects can be delivered?
Yeah, so indeed I was unusual, but many of my colleagues stay. I think people that work at the World Bank tend to stay a long time, and I know that that's not the case in most organizations. And I think the reason goes back to the mission of the work. People are driven by an aspiration to help with poverty reduction, and we have lots of resources, wonderful teams and colleagues. So I loved my time there, and it's been wonderful and a little bit freeing to also move on and see what else is out there. It's definitely been a bit of a change, not to have the bureaucracy on my shoulders to decide how I want to do things without needing a whole set of approvals. And ultimately, the work has been essentially the same, just with a little bit of a different environment. And that's what drives me. I just love the work. I feel passionate about what I do. I feel lucky to have the opportunity to have an impact on people's lives, to try to make a difference, to use all these decades of experience to try to do something useful and helpful for living conditions of those in developing countries.
I mean, that's phenomenal to be able to continue to be impactful. And I love that term you use, bureaucracy, to be able to take away some of the red tape to help mobilize you to focus on what you're passionate about. I believe is a huge advantage to keep that focus, keep that passion, to be able to keep delivering on such important work. But what I might do is we might move over to the rapid fire question part of this discussion. And these are just short little answers to give people a sense of how you work, how you operate, who you are as a person. How does that sound?
Sounds great.
All right. Are you a morning person or a night owl? When do you do your best work?
Definitely in the morning. I get up super
Morning?
early. Yeah. So I like mornings.
And how do you structure your day? How do you structure your week?
So I would say it's pretty normal. After working for so many years at a job that was, morning till night, I've kept the same schedule, a little more time for other things like exercise and a little more time for family. But I still, I work normal hours. For many years when I worked in East Asia, I had, I had to work at night. I had to, get on calls at 7 or 8 at night and then stay on until, it was really too late for me to continue. And I won't lie, that was difficult. I did it for many years. It was only when I left that region and started working like in Africa where the hours were much more amenable, I realized how hard it was. So I very much appreciate having my evenings free.
So to have a 9 to 5 in your own time zone is a luxury for you.
Exactly. Yeah.
Excellent. So when you're stuck, do you actively seek solutions or do you take the time and space to let it come to you?
So I do a little bit of both. I am not shy about calling people, emailing, just to sort of, I have a pretty big network of people that I trust and that I know have lots of experience and look at things a little bit differently than I do. So, I absolutely will reach out and try to get different inputs. And then, I need to sit on it and let it percolate. I find there's nothing better than a good long walk to clear my head and come to solutions and try to, sometimes flip things, so that it just, I see them completely different than I was before. And that often helps me to find clarity and solutions to the challenges that I'm thinking about.
Which philosophers, theorists, or inventors inspire you?
I'm not sure I'm so inspired by philosophers or theorists, mostly because I'm a practitioner. So, the people that inspire me are the people, that's not to say that big ideas aren't important, but the people that inspire me most are people that do things on the ground that make a difference. So that can be community activists, policymakers that get stuff done that can really, really, have tangible impacts on, conditions, whatever the case may be, whether it's, improving the lives of people, low income populations or other things too, in the field of technology or science. And those are the people that inspire me the most.
What technology do you use to stay efficient? And are there any AI tools that you're testing out?
So, I use the internet all the time. I'm not sure if that's sort of in the category. I've worked a little bit with ChatGPT, and I find it intriguing, also a little bit scary. And then, it's mostly communication, techniques. So, WhatsApp is a wonderful way to connect with people all over the world. And, what I love about it is that it's simple and easy and, it's free. So a lot of the colleagues that I work with in developing countries, they may have a cell phone, but they can't afford expensive services. And this just is a great way to communicate.
Yeah, I'm with you 100%. I think we underestimate just the global impact of WhatsApp and to have the chats. I remember when I got it and I could chat to friends across the world, and I was like you may as well be next to me, but you're in a very different situation in a very different country, and more reliable than internet service in many cases. And finally, how will we work in the future, and how do you believe we should prepare?
Great question. So I don't think people are going back to offices in droves. We know the evidence. So there's good and bad with that. It means that people get to work in an environment that's a little bit more conducive to their needs. It certainly helps with work-life balance, especially if you have a family. It means that you spend less time commuting. You can work a little bit more at your own schedule, but there are downsides. You miss the interaction with people. And I find that that's a huge loss, especially for some of my younger colleagues who really, still need that mentoring and day-to-day interaction on how to get things done. But I will say it's here to stay. So I think we need to learn how to adapt. I think there's a lot of very interesting and progressive things happening about within cities in particular about, reusing, repurposing office buildings for more affordable housing, creating more livable neighborhoods that are, where you can work and play in the same space. So I think going forward, that's going to be the big challenge is finding these hybrid solutions. And especially, going back to developing countries, where you're still building cities and you're still building urban infrastructure. These things need to be considered very proactively because the future of the workplace is going to be very different than it is now.
And I think that's a very interesting point that you raise. It's that if developing countries are to learn from developed countries, they can't follow the same blueprint because the blueprint needs to change. So understand it. And I suppose maybe there's an interesting concept in there around leapfrogging city design to understand we shouldn't repeat the model that's broken of office towers and single-use districts, that there needs to be that recognition of let's actually design for the reality that we're not just in today, but we are going to be in the future. And not just always thinking about what does that mean in a city like London or New York or Tokyo, but what does it mean for these new cities, these new communities around the world, that we get it right and we have that opportunity to get it right, which I think is absolutely a good brain exercise, I think, in amongst the other challenges and opportunities thinking about development. But Judy, it's just been such a delight to talk to you today. I feel like we hardly even scratched the surface of everything that you've done and achieved and the impact that you've been able to do through the World Bank, the impact that you've been able to have as an individual and a leader in this incredibly important space. We just don't spend enough time as very privileged people in the developed world to understand that 1 billion people are living in slums. And why are we not talking about, well, you talk about it every day, you live and breathe this, but why are we not talking about it every day? And why are we not actually thinking about how we can create a better reality and be proactive in helping them have a better reality, themselves through, better infrastructure, better safety, more empowerment, and everything that's needed to keep our world happy, and especially for these populations that deserve to have a high quality of life. So kudos to you. Kudos to all the work that you've done. It's been such a delight, and to be able to think about the nature of urban development, of, new cities, changing cities, formalizing informal settlements, and a whole different arena in the sense of what does this future look like, and how do change makers like yourself bring it about with a long-term horizon and a very empathetic approach to understanding that it really is community first and a lot of listening. Judy, thank you so much. If people do want to find you, if they want to reach out to you, where's the best place that they can go?
I think LinkedIn is a good place. It's easy to find me there.
Excellent. Thank you so much for your time.
Great. Thank you, Nikki. It's been a pleasure chatting with you.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of The Visionaries. If you're enjoying the show or finding it valuable, please consider rating or reviewing it. Your feedback helps us reach listeners to continue sharing these inspiring stories. Don't forget to share the podcast with friends or colleagues who might benefit from these insights. You can also stay connected with me on LinkedIn or YouTube at Nikki Greenberg. Thanks again, and I look forward to having you with us on the next episode.